When I was 16, my family moved to a new neighborhood. My old neighborhood was bustling with kids my age, and we always hung out, going to each other's houses or doing activities together. But in this new place, I didn't know anyone. It all started on the first day we moved in. I had just finished unpacking and decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. It was a nice day outside and the area looked pleasant. As I walked, I was texting on my phone and happened to trip, dropping it onto the neighbor's lawn. When I went to retrieve it, I heard a voice. "Hey kid, what are you doing?" I looked up to see an angry old man on the porch. I explained that I was just getting my phone, but he continued to yell at me to stay off the lawn. Typical. Suddenly, another voice chimed in. "Relax, old man." A boy about my age appeared beside me. "He just wants to get his phone." The old man glared at the boy but went back inside. I picked up my phone and the boy reassured me. "Don't worry about him. He's just a psycho." I thanked him for helping me out. "My name's Jer. Well, it's really Jerry, but I go by Jer. What's yours?" he asked. Elliot," I told him. He smiled and asked how old I was. When I told him, he said he was the same age. Jer asked if I wanted to hang out, and I agreed. He took me to an arcade, saying it was the best one in town. I liked arcades, so I went along. After a few minutes of playing games, I noticed a girl walking toward us. Jer grinned, but she gave him a dirty look and walked away. I asked him what that was about, but he just brushed it off, muttering an insult under his breath. We continued playing games, and after a while I headed home, telling Jer I'd see him around. He mentioned that he lived right next door, pointing to the house on the right of mine. I smiled and said that I'd see him tomorrow before heading in. The next day after breakfast, there was a knock on my door. It was Jer, asking if I wanted to hang out. I changed clothes and we set off. As we walked, a guy rode past us on a bike, looking kind of tense when he went by. I noticed as he rode by, Jared flipped him off. Once again, I caught myself asking what that was about. Jared said it was just a kid who'd been giving him problems. He then suggested we take a walk into the woods, and I agreed. In the woods, I found myself getting separated from Jer after a bit, and at one point I heard rumbling noises from the bushes. Alarmed, I saw a guy who was beaten and bleeding, crawling out. He grabbed onto me, pleading for help. I supported him, putting his arm around my neck, and I called for Jer. When he arrived, he recognized the guy and looked weird. I suggested taking the injured guy to the hospital, and Jer nodded, reluctantly, never taking his eyes off of him. At the hospital while we waited, Jer seemed distant and eventually walked out. I assume from having brought him in, a doctor asked if I wanted to see the injured guy, whose name was Gary, and so I agreed. When I asked what had happened, Gary took a cautious look around and revealed that Jer had attacked him. Gary explained that he'd wanted to stop hanging out with Jer after discovering his violent tendencies. That morning, Jer had lured him into the woods and beaten him. Shocked, I left the hospital and found Jer waiting outside. "What did he say to you?" he demanded. I tried to deflect, but Jer repeated the same question, although more threatening this time. "What did he say to you?" I quickly walked away, feeling his stare on me the whole time. Later at home, while watching TV, I heard a knock at the door. Looking outside and seeing no one, I shrugged it off, but then I heard tapping at the kitchen window. When I checked, nobody was there. The tapping moved to the living room window, and I saw someone running to the side of the house. Panicked, I checked all the windows, but once again saw no one. Just as I was about to call the police, the phone rang. When I answered, there was only heavy breathing on the other end. And right after that, the power went out. I was freaked out. I heard glass breaking in the kitchen. As I quickly went to grab my cell phone, I caught a glimpse of a hooded figure. I turned on the light of the phone and the figure had tackled me, holding a knife. I was able to block a punch and kick him off of me momentarily. I ran toward the front door, but he grabbed me and pulled me further into the dark house. The knife was at my neck. I struggled but elbowed him off me as he opened the door and tried to pull me in. The dark figure recovered and tackled me to the door as we fell downstairs. I realized that we just fell into the basement. I used my phone's light again and saw the knife. He made a grab for it, but I kicked it away. The figure then grabs me and starts to punch me, but I fight back as much as I can. As he quickly goes for another punch, I'm able to block it and punch him in the face, giving me enough time to make a beeline for the door. I go straight to Jer's house and knock on the door. His mom answers and I tell her to call the police. I wait on the couch just as the police arrive, and Jer's mom in a panic goes upstairs to fetch Jer, but then later comes down and tells me he's not in his room. I wonder why. I go outside and see the police coming out with the guy, his hood now off. Although the thought was in the back of my mind the whole time, I still look in horror as I see Jer's face revealed. He gives me a pure look of hatred as he gets put into the car. His parents just stood there in utter shock. They told me they arrested him multiple times for assault and even stabbing someone. It kind of made sense as to why he didn't have many friends due to his behavior. So unpredictable to the point he would attack people. I had been hanging out with someone who had such bad intentions. My parents were called and they came in and hugged me. Jer's family moved out not too long after that. I haven't seen him since, and I hope I never do. This all began in late July of 2012. I come from a small town where everyone knows everyone. I had just turned 18, and like most 18-year-olds in my town, I loved going down to the beach for bonfires and drinks. My close friend Adam would often drive with me to the bigger city nearby to find things to do. And one night after saying goodnight to my parents, we decided to catch a movie in the city, and afterward we stopped by a McDonald's to get some food. That's where I met the man who would ruin my life. The guy who served us, we'll call him Chris, struck up a conversation with me outside as I was having a cigarette. He asked me for a light, introduced himself, and eventually asked for my number. We made plans to see each other the following weekend. After about a month of spending a lot of time together, Chris and I made our relationship official. He would stay over at my place on my parents' property most weeknights and drop me off at school in the morning. One morning, I eventually introduced Chris to my friend Julia, which turned out to be a huge mistake. A few weeks after Chris met Julia, our relationship fell apart in a very messy breakup. That's when the scary stuff began. I would hear footsteps on the gravel driveway at random hours of the night. I often saw Chris's car at the end of my parents' road. I would see it parked under the streetlight before I went to bed. The stalking escalated to where I could hear him talking outside my window, trying to jiggle open the garage door. Things got worse when I began receiving texts and phone calls from an unknown number. The messages described my every move and made threats about breaking into my house and harming me. This was during my end-of-year exams and university applications. I was already stressed out. I confided in Julia, unaware that she had still been spending more time with Chris since I introduced them. She knew my schedule and my routines, making it easy for Chris to target me. One evening, while working late with my drama class on our final performance, some classmates noticed Chris's car parked across the road. I freaked out and called my mom, who came to pick me up. I finally decided to go to the police with the threatening messages and the fact that someone was trying to break into our property. Chris, who was known to carry weapons due to his involvement in the drug world, was furious when the police ended up searching his home. But strangely enough, they found nothing. That night, he parked at the end of our road and waited for all the lights to go out. He then crept along the front paddocks of the house and up the driveway. I was sleeping in my parents' living room when I heard him outside, and I swear, I heard a gun being loaded. Terrified, I crawled to my parents' room and woke them up. My dad grabbed his rifle and chased after the intruder, setting off the sensor light as they fled into the darkness. Things calmed down for about a month until I moved 10 hours away to a new city. The night after I left, my mom called to say someone had been in my house, leaving muddy footprints everywhere. Strange incidents continued at my parents' place. Odd noises in the night, cars driving by slowly with their lights off, and strange things started happening at my apartment too. I often saw a car parked across the road, its windows tinted, watching me. I received voicemails from private numbers, filled with violent threats. This continued for a couple years, until suddenly it just stopped. No more phone calls, no sightings of strange cars, no unusual events at my parents' place. Now every time I go home, I never tell anyone when I'm leaving or when I'll be back, just for my own safety. I still get flashbacks whenever I hear a car backfire or see a vehicle similar to Chris's. I keep my home address private and my home number restricted because a big part of me still feels that Chris is out there looking for me, hunting me. I would always tell my mom, if I go missing, we know where to start looking.